department of curriculum here in Rincon Valley, and we have been working on implementing the Common Core state standards for the last couple of years, and this year we're starting to look at the next generation science standards. And this is a movement not just in Rincon Valley, not just in California, but across the nation. And we have a little saying in our curriculum department: when you know better, you do better. And we're kind of in education, we're at a point where we know better, and so we need to do better. And as a result of that, we know that we need to change our grading practices, and we needed to change our report card a bit. So I wanted to give you that background before we launch into talking about this report card. It's just so that you would have an idea about that. So really what I'm going to talk about is why do we change and how's it going to affect your kid? Because that's what you want to know, right? How's this report card going to be different than what we did before? So I talked about this already, that we've been using standards for a while. We're implementing some new standards. They're standards that are good for kids. We believe in these standards. And they are more complex than the old standards, so we have to do things a little bit differently than we have had to do in the past. Things that I've heard people say, or that I may or may not have said myself. So C is average. Average of what? Just get a C or higher, right? Okay, that would be my oldest son. I hope that the teacher grades on a curve, right? I will take 10 points from your score if your name is not on your paper. Or I'm going to deduct 10% from your score for every day that your paper is late. Can I do some extra credit to bring up my grade? Which brings me to the most interesting middle schooler in the world. I don't always care about my grade, but when I do, it's the end of the semester, and even though I didn't do all the assignments, I'll ask for extra credit now. Right? This is typical middle school thinking. And so how can we get away from this? How can we motivate kids to do work during the year and not wait till the end and then ask for extra credit, right? Precisely define an A minus without using a percentage. What does an A minus mean? Okay, got your answer to that? All right, again, without using a percentage, what's the difference between an A minus and a B plus? I don't know. When your child earns a B, what does it tell you about how well they learned the standards or the concepts in that grading period? I mean, those are things that we have to think about. So when we think about these things, and the difference between an A minus and a B plus, right? Using percentages, an A minus is 90% usually, right? Or 89.5. But a B plus is 89.4. So those grades don't tell you a whole lot about what your kid learned. And here's the reason. Because look what gets put into a traditional grade. Think back to your own school years. What gets put into a grade? The pretest that you took. What? The pretest? But the teacher hasn't even taught those concepts yet. And I got a 40% on that test, but it's counted in my grade. But the teacher didn't teach it yet. Right? So pretest. Every single class assignment in the grading period. So every piece of homework, every piece of classwork, whether I had time to practice it early in the semester or whether it was late in the semester, every single assignment, all of the homework. Even though the teacher doesn't know if the student did the homework, if they did it independently with help, if their older brother or sister did the homework, their friend did the homework, right? Penalties and extra credit, kind of like what I talked about 10% off your grade for, not having your name on there. Tests and quizzes, projects, those are all included. Group assignments, 1 grade for the group. How many of you hate group assignments? Yeah, you guys are the ones who do all the work in the group assignments, right? Because those kids, if the group gets 1 grade, no matter what you contributed, everybody gets the same grade, and it counts the same on a traditional report card. So we know that something's got to change here, something's got to give, so that we can actually report learning rather than just grades. So on a standards-based report card, what contributes to an achievement mark? And if you notice the blank report card that you got at back to school night, they're called achievement marks, not grades. And what contributes to an achievement mark? Well, look at all that stuff that got crossed off. Because what we want to look at is how kids are performing to the standard. So we take those quizzes and tests, that's part of it, individual project or individual parts of group projects, but instead of including every class assignment in the entire grading period, we count assignments that are given after some practice time has been given. So if I teach something, if I teach a concept on day 1, I might give a little quiz at the end of that day, or I might check student work, but I'm not grading it yet. What I'm doing as a teacher is I'm looking at that work to try to decide, what do I need to do tomorrow? Who's got it? Who needs to move on? And who needs more practice, right? So I'm not grading it yet. So we give kids multiple opportunities after they've had time. We give them multiple opportunities for practice, and we don't start scoring things until a little bit later. So that's what contributes to an achievement mark. So I have a baking analogy for you that I think might help make things clear. So in a standards-based grading system, you look at the standard. And in this analogy, the standard is follow a recipe to bake and frost cupcakes, not from a box. Okay? So that's the standard. Follow a recipe, bake and frost cupcakes. Everybody got it? Okay. So how do we measure success? Well, the first thing we do is we figure out if a kid meets the standard, what does it look like? Well, in this case, meeting the standard, mastering the standard, they baked cupcakes and they created frosting from the recipe. Does that seem reasonable? Think so? They did not need help. They were able to do it independently. And the cupcakes and the frosting were tasty, right? Because that's an important part of being able to follow a recipe. So they were able to do that successfully. So here we go. We've got our mastered the standard cupcake, all right? So what does it look like if you're not quite there? If you're not quite there, if you're making steady progress toward the standard, but you're not there yet, you baked the cupcakes and you created frosting. You needed help with some of the steps. So you needed some coaching along the way. Maybe you weren't sure how to use the measuring cup or the measuring spoons. You needed some help. The cupcakes were fine, but the frosting was not quite fine. Or vice versa, right? So here's our 2 cupcake. It's not quite what our 3 cupcake, but they did produce something, right? We needed a little bit of help, but not quite there. So what does it look like if you're making limited progress to the standards? In that case, you needed help on many of the steps. You needed a lot of support. And even with support, the cupcakes were burnt, or they were underbaked, or they didn't taste good. Maybe you forgot to add something, right? You mistook the salt for the sugar, that kind of thing. So not so successful, right? They didn't come out of the pan so well. Then there's a 4th category. The 4th category we're calling deep command, and I want you to know that we made a conscious choice not to call it a 4. And I'm going to explain why in a couple minutes, but let's talk about what a deep command looks like first. So a deep command is a student who took the recipe and used it to make a cake. Took the cupcake recipe, made a cake. Modified the frosting recipe to create fondant, and then created shapes to decorate the cake. And the student was able to adjust the baking time so the cake was baked perfectly, right? Different baking time for cupcakes versus a cake. So the student was able to apply knowledge to do that. So a deep command is something that's really different, that shows that they deeply understand the concept of the ingredients and the recipe. Notice that a deep command, this is why we didn't call it a 4, it's not putting sprinkles on the cupcake. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it's not prettying it up. It's doing something that's deeper, that shows that you have a different level of understanding than mastering that standard. And that's an important distinction. So at some point, will we move to a 4? Maybe. Right now, while we're all learning this, we kind of want you to have to think like, what is that deep command thing again? We want to draw your attention to it because we want you to understand that if your child did earn a deep command, they've gone beyond the standard, truly beyond the standard. Sticking with that analogy, let's talk about a couple of things. So homework is practice. Homework is following recipes, is learning how to use, well, instruction is probably learning how to use the measuring cups and finding out why I need to put salt in a recipe, in a baking recipe, why I need to use a certain amount of flour, right? So but the homework is just practice parts, baking cupcakes, frosting cupcakes. But there are too many variables to use to use it to measure mastery. And that makes sense, right? Because you don't know if the kid brings in the next morning cupcakes that her mom made, right? I mean, that totally could happen. So there's a lot of variables there. You don't know how much help they had in practicing. Group projects are also practice, especially at RVCS. Teachers use group practice a lot because it's a way that kids can coach each other and that they can help each other on this practice of the standard. But again, too many variables to use group activities and group projects to measure mastery. And then there's no penalties or reward for behavior. Now, let me clarify that. There are no academic penalties for behavior. If a student didn't wear gloves when they were, or an apron when they were baking the cupcakes, we didn't take points away. We can deal with that separately. That's a behavior, or we call those attributes for success, and I'll talk about those more. And we're not going to give them more points for bringing in baking supplies, because it doesn't have anything to do with their learning, right? So not wearing gloves or not wearing an apron, that might be a behavior we have to deal with hygiene in the kitchen, but we're going to deal with that separately than their academic mark, whether they mastered the standard, which had nothing to do with gloves and had to do with following a recipe. To this, what contributes to an achievement mark? Class assignments that happen after instruction of the standard and after some opportunities for practice, quizzes and tests, individual projects or individual parts of group projects. We're looking for evidence of mastery. That's the key. So anything that goes into an achievement mark on the report card is evidence of mastery of the standard or groups of standards. Students have to have more than one opportunity to show mastery. We say that they need at least 3 to 5 opportunities to show mastery of a standard after they've had some practice. And they need to have opportunities to show deep command. So what if I stick with that baking analogy, what if a student baked cupcakes perfectly first time out the gate? Don't you as a parent want them to have opportunities to take that further? So our teachers have to be able to do that. They have to be able to give some opportunities for kids to show that they have a deep command of something and to further develop that in kids. And then if kids want to retest or redo an assignment or a project, there's some must-do activities. So kids don't, if a student fails a test on Tuesday, they don't get to come in on Wednesday and say, oh, I want to redo it. I want to retake it. Well, that's the time when the teacher gets to say, well, let's talk about the homework you haven't been doing this week. You haven't shown me any practice, so you need some time to practice before you retest. And so the homework The practice opportunities are very important for kids, and teachers encourage kids to do those. But we do know that sometimes there are kids that don't do their homework because they already know it. And they're feeling like, why am I doing this homework? Why am I doing these 40 problems? I've already shown my teacher that I can do this. We need to provide some differentiation for them. So this is where teachers really talk to kids about their work habits before they can redo tests and activities and things like that. Deadlines are still important and necessary in a school system, though, and I hope that you understand that. So a concept that's taught at the beginning of a unit of study, maybe a student doesn't do so well at that. By the end of the unit of study, the student still isn't doing well. The class goes on to another unit of study. It's going to be very difficult for that student to go back to that first unit of study. And that's just the confines of the school system. But it does lead us to this essential attributes for success. And these are the behaviors that support learning and they support mastery. So this is where kids get to take ownership of their learning. This is where they get to use that growth mindset of you can get better at something by practicing, by putting effort in. And we don't just evaluate these attributes. We develop them in children. We, teachers, the school, you, parents, right? We have to help our 11, 12, 13-year-old kids develop these attributes because not all of them come in doing their homework on time all the time. Not all of them work well in a group, right? They're still learning those skills. So it's important for us to develop them. Successful, or the score of S in the attributes, is the expectation for all students. There's no P for perfect. So if a student can do an attribute successfully, that's exactly what we want. So you won't see that there's an E or a P for something better than successful. We ask ourselves, does the attribute interfere with the student's ability to show their mastery of learning? And if it interferes, then it's probably less than an S, right? And then some courses, you just need to be aware that some courses are more oriented to the essential attributes of success, PE, band, art, drama. Those are more about persistence and perseverance and working together. Here's the information you really want to know. How's this going to affect my kid? So let's talk about homework first. So homework's part of the practice and the process of learning. We talked about that already. And it helps students and teachers decide what's next. What do I need to do next? If a student can't successfully do homework independently, that tells teachers a lot. So don't feel like you have to rescue your kid if they're struggling with their homework. It's okay if they bring it back and they've struggled with it, they didn't do well, that gives teachers a lot of information. So we're not going to be grading every single homework assignment because it's practice. Academic rigor does not equal the amount of work assigned. I don't know how much I can stress that to you guys. Your kids work hard when they're in school, and our program is rigorous. But homework is changing because we are asking kids to explain their thinking. We are asking them to look at solutions from look at problems from different points of view to come up with different solutions. And so homework may be adjusted in that regard. So don't panic about that. It's okay. And again, homework is practice. If a student is showing that they're mastering, they may not need additional practice. And so be aware of that. Think about the complexity of the work that's coming home. And then homework completion is reported on the report card. It's in the essential attributes for success. So we still have a way to report that to you. So here's that parent's role. I do want to say the top point on this slide might be the most important thing I say tonight. Insufficient evidence is the enemy of standards-based grading. We can't tell what kids know if we don't have enough work, if we don't have enough evidence of their learning. So your role as a parent is to check on what they're doing. And I know that the second bullet here talks about a combination of Haiku and Illuminate, and Erin has been doing a great job working on how we can use each of those systems to report back information to you so that there's not a huge gap between the time kids turn in assignments and you're wondering, oh my God, are they doing what they're supposed to be doing? And so look for more information coming about that pretty soon. And cut us a little slack while we're learning that system as well. But keep the lines of communication open. Email is great. Teachers are great with email. Check notebooks and planners, and you can get a lot of information there. And then the student-led conference is going to undergo some revision this year as well, because kids are going to be reporting to you how they're doing on those essential attributes of success. So kids are going to be self-evaluating, and then teachers are going to be evaluating. Is a big thing in middle school, so I just want to say that our local receiving schools do not look at report cards when they put kids in classes. Teacher recommendation is the most heavily weighted factor. So they ask our teachers, where do you think these kids should be placed? And in math specifically, they give a placement test to see where kids need to be placed in math. They use state test scores to verify or validate, like in borderline cases, I don't know if this kid should be in advanced blank or not, but we don't have any state tests. Not this past year. We won't have them. The tests we get this year are not. We're not going to be able to really use for that purpose. Those will be it's going to be the baseline year. So that's not going to happen in the next couple of years. But I can assure you that even if you're moving out of the area, our new report card gives more specific information than our old report card did. Which leads us right into grade point average. Right? This is what everybody wants to know. But does my kid have a 4.0? I don't know. So grade point average. People feel really, really strongly about this. I'm going to encourage you to take a step back from what you know and what you experienced as a kid. You cannot equate these new scores, which are about mastering standards, to the old scores, which are an average of all work. You just can't equate those two things, and it's not a simple conversion. DCs, deep commands, it's not likely that those are going to be common. 3s are the expectations for all kids, that kids will master the standards that they're taught during the year, with support, with practice, but that kids are going to master the standards. Some kids are going to go on to deep command, but the 3 is the goal for students. So teachers ask themselves at the beginning of a unit of study, they ask themselves, what will it look like or sound like if a student can do this standard independently? And that's a 3. So somebody asked, when I did this at Matanzas a couple nights ago, somebody asked, so 90 to 100%, is that mastered the standard? And then 80 to 89% would be a 2? Well, that depends. Generally speaking, 80% is considered mastery in education. If you know 80% of something, that's considered mastery. You can do it successfully enough most of the time. But there are some standards that are super important. How about letter sounds? You kind of have to have 100% mastery of that to be a really good reader. How about multiplication facts? You probably need better than 80% mastery. Better than 80% correct to be considered mastery of that. So 80 to 100% could be considered mastery, but it depends on the subject, depends on the standard. So our job is to educate the community. I know that scholar athlete designation is important to a lot of people, and our job is to educate the community and to educate our coaches in our extracurricular activities. I mean, school-based sports and things, we can easily do that, but to get information out to Little League and to the swim clubs and things that give that scholar athlete designation. I'm going to move to the next slide because I think it furthers that, and that is that a student who receives a 3 in every academic category should be considered exemplary. If you've mastered every standard that has been taught to you this year, that's exemplary. So I think that that's something that you really need to think about. We can't just say straight across a 3 is the new A, because they're two totally different animals. But a 3, master the standard, if you do that all the way across the board, that's pretty good. That's pretty remarkable. I think that DCs are, I consider those bonus points. You know how like in high school, you have kids that graduate with 4.25s because they took AP classes and they got extra points for it? That's what I consider DCs. Like they're extra points, they're bonus points. And that's where students can stretch themselves. And some of our students are high achieving and gifted students. That's really what they need to be doing. Essential attributes of success need to be factored in. A student who has shown mastery of every standard but can't work in a group still has something to work on. So that's important to remember as well. Colleges do not look at elementary and middle school report cards. I promise you. They do not. So it's okay to kind of detach us, elementary and middle school, from that GPA. And we really talked a lot about that when we worked on this report card. Do we have to stick with an ABC system just because high schools do? Do we have to stick with a GPA just because high schools do? When it really doesn't transfer. So high schools, they're moving to standards-based grading, but they do have to listen to the college boards. And GPA is not likely to go away at that level. But there's grading. What goes into a grade is likely to change. So when you go to a high school back to school night, you're going to, in the next couple of years, you're going to be much less likely to hear. And 40% of their grade is going to be homework. That part of it is going away. So even if their letter scale doesn't change, what goes into the grade is likely to change. I understand, I recognize no one wants to be the guinea pigs. I know that. But this is about us learning and growing as a system to better serve our kids. They need to be competitive in a global economy where they need to be problem solvers. They need to be oriented to, they need to know things deeply. They need to be oriented to working as a team, doing those essential attributes to success. They need to know how to learn, not what to learn, right? If you want to know the what of something, what do? I Google it if I want to know the what. But if I don't know how to learn, then the first thing that pops up on my Google search is what I take as gospel. And we have to teach kids how to interpret that and decide, evaluate that. Is that good information? What was the source? A little story about Dr. Eric Mazur. He is a physics professor at Harvard. He is an amazing speaker and an amazing teacher. And he tells this story. He says, I teach at Harvard. I teach physics. I teach physics to pre-med students. I teach at Harvard. Every kid in my class took AP physics. I teach at Harvard. Every kid took AP physics. Every kid got a 5 on the AP physics exam. Because I teach at Harvard, and that's who gets admitted to Harvard, are the kids that get 5s on the AP physics exam. On the first day of class, I give a test that has no physics terms on it, just everyday life problems that involve physics. Every single student fails it every year. That says something. I don't know if it says something to you, but it says something to me as an educator. It means we've been teaching kids formulas and memorization, but we haven't taught them how to solve the problem. We haven't taught them to apply what they know. And there is actually an education term for that, about misapplying formulas and algorithms. But that's what we want to change. We want to get kids to the point where they can pass a physics exam that has no physics terms on it, where they can take everyday life problems and use physics to solve it. So that's our goal.